Welcome to those of you watching and to the candidates. Good evening. My name is Michelle Thorsell. I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellen. On behalf of the 7 local league chapters hosting tonight's event, I thank you for joining us for the U.S. Congressional District 3 Democratic Candidate Forum. The format tonight is virtual, and we ask that candidates and viewers eliminate distractions and give the forum their undivided attention as they would for an in-person event. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. We encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. The League works to increase understanding of the major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. Our moderator this evening is Jan Dorner. She is a member of the League of Women Voters of Elmhurst and resides outside of Congressional District 3. Jan is a past president of the League of Women Voters of Illinois, 2011 to 2013, and has served on the state board several years before and after her term as president. She has been involved in the League's mock election program for high school students and has championed the League of Women Voters of Illinois' online voter guide, illinoisvoterguide.org. A member of the Elmhurst Local League, Jan has served as observer of local school board, which she has done for over 30 years. Jan received her BS from Northern Illinois University in biology and professionally worked in the pharmaceutical, food, and cosmetic industries. She has 2 adult children and 2 grandchildren. Welcome, Jan, and thank you for moderating this forum.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening. It is an honor for me to be moderating today's candidate forum. All Democratic candidates on the ballot were invited to participate, and 3 of the candidates are joining us this evening. Candidate Aguirre did not respond to the invitation. I would like to begin by reviewing some of the League's ground rules for candidate forums. All candidates attending tonight have signed and returned the ground rules. These rules specify the format, time limits, and other rules related to the conduct of the forum. I will be responsible for enforcing these rules. The candidates will begin in alphabetical order with their opening statements. They will alternate the order in which they answer questions, and after the question portion of the forum, each candidate will give a closing statement. Each candidate will be given 1 minute for their opening statement, 1 minute to respond to each question unless I specify otherwise, and 1 minute to make a closing statement. Their responses will be timed, as you will see on the screen. The questions have been gathered in advance from the public. A panel of experienced members of the League of Women Voters have reviewed the questions submitted and carefully screened questions for appropriateness for the office and to avoid duplication for tonight's event. The format tonight is a candidate forum, not a debate format. The candidates are expected to accurately represent the facts. The League of Women Voters is not responsible for the accuracy of statements made by candidates. It is the responsibility of the public, news media, opposing candidates et al. To fact check statements made by candidates if deemed necessary. This forum is held as a service to the voters so they can hear directly from the candidates regarding views on key issues and qualifications. To be of best service to the voters, candidates' responses are to reflect their own views and opinions and refrain from commenting on the views of the other candidates. The event tonight is being recorded. The League claims copyright ownership of any recording or transcript produced of the forum. The forum will be posted in its entirety on the host League's websites, social media platform, and the Illinois Voter Guide. Any other use of the forum recording requires the express written approval of the League. Audio and video must be broadcast unedited and in its entirety, except by media reporting on events. Finally, I want to emphasize how grateful we are for these candidates who are not only willing to serve in office, but who agreed to come here this evening. Candidates, please start your video and unmute your audio. So tonight's first candidate is Ayman Chahade. Candidate Shahade, your opening statement, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ayman Shahadi. And first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation and for putting this together. I'm running because this district is very important to me. When my father came here to the United States from Colombia, and before that from Palestine, he came to this very district, started off at Logan Square, and toward the end of his life, he lived in Wayne, which is on the opposite side of the district. We have roots in this district that span decades here. My parents met in this district. And so I'm running because I can identify with all segments of this district. While today I'm a professor, a foreign policy advisor, and a candidate for Congress, I also know what it's like not to have food on the table. I left school at a very young age, and I know well what the streets are like and what it's like to struggle. And so we need folks in office who understand what people go through. I bring both empathy as well as resilience, and in addition, some street smarts as well. And so in the same way I fought for myself and my family, I'll also fight for this district. We need people.
Thank you. Delia Ramirez, your opening statement, please.
Thank you. I'm running to continue on the work that I've done here in Illinois. I'm the daughter of Guatemalan immigrants who worked multiple minimum wage jobs to raise me and my siblings. And they taught me the values of service, of community, of integrity. It's why I've spent literally my entire life in public service, from running homeless shelters, leading community organizations, working on campaign finance reform, and opening an immigration clinic before I ran for office. And it's why when I became a state rep, I hit the ground running. I wanted to make sure that we expanded healthcare coverage regardless of legal status. Today, Illinois is the first in the nation to provide healthcare coverage to seniors. I secured more than $1.5 billion of assistance for those in the pandemic impacted by housing insecurity. And I've worked really hard to codify Roe versus Wade here in Illinois. I want to take that work to Congress. I'm ready to do so. I'm a resident of this district, and I am prepared and experienced to represent us in Congress.
Thank you. Gilbert Gil Viejas, your opening statement, please.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Gil Villegas, and I'm running because as an alderman, I've been able to accomplish a lot. I can tell you, whether it's humble beginnings growing up in the Chicago Housing Authority, growing up with a single mom after my dad passed suddenly, having benefited from a Social Security's survival death benefits, a program that helped my mom and allowed her the ability to work with dignity. I know that government and those types of programs help. And I want to make sure at the federal level that we're doing it. Here locally, it passed the largest guaranteed basic income program in the country, which gives people a hand up. During this pandemic, people have been struggling. As an alderman, we provide all types of services. And I can tell you that as a congressman for the 3rd district, I will be providing even more services. Here locally, we've been able to provide $635 million in affordable housing, $135 million in violence prevention. I know how to get things done, and I'm ready to hit the ground running.
Thank you. Let's start with the questions. First question goes to candidate Ramirez. Are you in favor of campaign finance reform? If so, how would you implement it over the next 5 years?
I am. It's actually one of my top 3 priorities. We have to get big money out of politics. And when we think about the threat to our democracy, we also know that corporations are co-opting our legislative process. It's why I'm not taking any corporate PAC contributions. I co-sponsor a small donor match program at the state level. We have to end Citizens United. And if this Supreme Court won't do it, we need to do it through legislation. And I'm prepared to work on that over the next 5 years and hopefully sooner. We also have to call for public financing of elections so that we limit the amount of money being spent in these elections. And you get people elected based on qualifications, not based on how much they raise. I think that we should be asking every congressional member to take a pledge not to take corporate PAC contributions, so that they're there for our community, not corporations and other corporate interests impacting our ability to pass legislation.
Thank you. Candidate Viejas, the same question.
Thank you. Campaign finance reform must be a priority for all members coming to Congress. Ending Citizens United There should not be unlimited dark money contributions to anyone accountable to the public. Whether you're receiving corporate funds, super PACs, political committees that can raise and spend unlimited funds, thanks to Citizens United. They have raised $4.9 billion to spend on influencing elections. One way to support campaign finance reform is to put the small donor public financing in place that was outlined in HR 1. Now, we talk about folks not taking corporate money for congressional, but there is a history of folks taking corporate money for other races. So we got to be true to that and making sure that people are honest on the contributions that they're getting. HR 1 does not spend any taxpayer funds on public financing. Rather, it increases a 2.75% surcharge, so that way it's not coming out of the taxpayers' money. It's actually coming from administrative penalties collected by the federal government. We got to pass HR 1 as soon as possible.
Thank you. Candidate Shahade.
Well, I'm 100% for it. You know, PAC money in politics, when organizations often representing the views of a few individuals can nonetheless dump unlimited resources to essentially buy the candidate. Unfortunately, I see this happening in this particular primary. DMFI, an organization which endorsed my opponent, Gil Villegas, supports policies against Palestinians that Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International called apartheid. But Gil's going to tap dance for them, do their bidding, and in exchange, they'll support his candidacy by dumping large resources to his campaign. Delia got the endorsement of J Street. They're a bit more moderate, but they perpetuate occupation of Palestinians as well. They're the organization that says, stop shooting at Palestinians, Israel, yet they provide Israel for bullets to keep shooting. They normalize the abnormal. I want to co-sponsor and sponsor legislation to get rid of super PACs who can currently accept unlimited contributions to disclose or not to disclose to donors. I also want to work with like-minded politicians and organizations as well to reverse Citizens United.
Candidate Villegas, do you support the U.S. government's continued funding of Ukraine's defense against Russia? What should the U.S. do to address the increase of authoritarianism across the globe?
Yeah, well, we must support the Ukrainian people from this unjust and just purely evil invasion from Russia. I support the bipartisan efforts from Congress to send weapons and aid to the people in Ukraine to ensure that they can continue fighting and defend themselves from this dictator that's in Russia. We must also ensure that we are sanctioning Russia and helping the Ukrainian people. But we must ensure that we do not get dragged into World War III. I'm the only person in this race that's been in the armed forces. I fought for our country, and we must continue to support democracy in all its forms across the globe.
Thank you. Candidate Shahade, same question.
I support the people of Ukraine and all other oppressed groups around the world. What Russia did was violate the independence of Ukraine as well as the individual rights of the Ukrainian people. And thus, in principle, I support the right of the people of Ukraine to defend themselves. What's problematic is that the US has allocated billions of dollars to this issue. It is lopsided and unfair for US taxpayers to pay for this when other countries in Europe and around the world should share the cost of defending Ukraine. In the months of campaigning, I've met seniors who have no food on the table because of the high cost of medication and insurance and taxes they have to pay. There's no reason why our senior citizens should be suffering like that. We have a collapsing infrastructure in our inner cities and rural areas. Our schools are underfunded. Also, we're $30 trillion in debt. Where are we going to get this money from? We need to prioritize the American people while at the same time supporting the freedom of other countries like the Ukraine.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez.
I too support the government's continued funding of Ukraine's defense against Russia. Look, I represent Ukrainian Village, the largest Ukrainian community in the entire state of Illinois. And it's when I heard that Putin was attacking Ukraine that I immediately filed a resolution and jumped on legislation to ensure that we establish sanctions also from state funds from any Russian holdings to hold the oligarchs accountable, and establish also a Ukrainian refugee program here in Illinois, and provide also the supports for the families, those Ukrainians living in diaspora here in Ukrainian Village and all over the state of Illinois. For me, my approach to foreign policy is an approach of diplomacy, protection of human rights, and protection of democracy. And I think at the federal level, we can continue to lead with diplomacy, and we have to do better in making sure that we protect human rights at all costs. And I will work continuously for the peace of Ukraine as well as the peace of other countries all around the world.
Thank you. Candidate Shahade, how do you foresee the recently signed Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act specifically impacting District 3?
Well, the bill helps rebuild and revitalize the infrastructure of the United States, which has been ignored. So this is a positive. This helps us here in the district by rebuilding infrastructure in both urban as well as rural areas, which of course is needed. It's going to help modernize our roads, bridges, drinking water infrastructure, which will also mean more good union jobs for people in our area and healthier communities. However, I don't think that the bill goes far enough. One of the problems with the bill is many aspects of it actually don't address the historic inequity that has existed in minority communities. And so in order for prosperity to be universal, this needs to be addressed. We have to realize that we're a single country. And if there's an area that is poverty stricken, ultimately that will affect all areas of the country. And so I proposed a Marshall Plan, which is on my website, which is named after the plan that revitalized Western Europe as a way to achieve those goals.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez?
I think that the bill is an incredible opportunity to reverse years and years of disinvestment in our communities. I agree with Ayman that there are neighborhoods in the 3rd Congressional District that haven't seen any real supports for many, many years at the federal level. And this district is a key transportation hub with O'Hare literally around the corner from it, with railroads and highways that are critical for our economy. This federal bill provides the resources we need to maintain the critical transportation of infrastructure, but we also have to keep those jobs. And we need to make sure that people are able to go and come back from work through public transportation that's accessible. Look, at the state level, we created good jobs through the Clean Energy Jobs Act bill, and we passed a $42 billion infrastructure bill that was critical to be able to, yes, strengthen our investment in our bridges and our roads, but also more than $150 million in the building of affordable housing. I think all of that has to be taken into account as we look at infrastructure.
Thank you. And candidate Viejas.
Thank you for that question. I think the Infrastructure and Jobs Act is a great bill, bipartisan bill. But we need a person in Congress that will ensure that we are bringing that money back to the 3rd District. We need expanded funding for our roads and bridges, expanded high-speed internet access for both rural and urban environments. In Black and brown neighborhoods in Chicago and throughout the district, some areas have internet access of almost 60%, 60% internet access. Which is unacceptable in this day and age. We use the internet for everything, and kids need it for school more than ever. The pandemic has emphasized that. Listen, at the City Council, we passed the $3.9 billion capital bill. I've led departments in state government, Department of Transportation, Capital Development Board, and I understand how important it is to invest in infrastructure, but what this infrastructure bill does is not just invest in roads and bridges, but also invest in human infrastructure by allowing professionals to have an opportunity to work on these projects, especially these that have been impacted by unemployment.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez, describe your ideal healthcare plan for the country.
I fully support Medicare for all. I think that healthcare is a human right. And in one of the richest countries in the world, no one should be afraid to seek medical attention because they're afraid of the debt they'll incur. My mother is a home care worker and makes minimum wage in her 60s, and she can't afford healthcare. She's on Medicaid right now, waiting to be eligible for Medicare. For me, we have to make sure that we are doing everything possible to expand healthcare coverage to as many people as possible. It's why I expanded healthcare coverage. And as of this year in July, if you're 42 and older and you qualify for Medicaid, you will get healthcare in Illinois. We have to do that at the federal level. We also have to lower the age to access Medicare from 65 to 55. We have to negotiate the prescription drug prices. I don't take any money from pharmaceutical companies. We have to make sure that people don't have to choose between their medication and paying for their mortgage. And I will continue the work I've done here in Illinois at the federal level.
Thank you. Candidate Viejas, your ideal healthcare plan.
Thank you. I've represented communities just ravaged by the pandemic. And the most important thing we can do right now is get more people covered as soon as possible. We should immediately lower the age of eligibility for Medicare to 55. Put a public option into the Affordable Care Act and bulk negotiate prescription drugs. Prescription drugs. This day and age where people are concerned about having the ability to pay for food or pay for medicine. My grandma passed away from insulin because she was from diabetes rather. And I remember as a young boy having to administer insulin to her and thinking then how much she relied on that. All of those things are plans to have a chance of passing the US Senate and quickly we got to do something quickly. I would like to see a Medicare for all plan, but we got to build up enough popularity for it to be enacted. But it's just not going to pass anytime soon because we need decades of activism for it to be passed. We can get 218 votes. I'm for it. The options later. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Shahade.
I think
you're
if there's
on the healthcare plan.
I think if there's a will, there's a way. The standard should be that everyone in the US should be covered and that there isn't a single individual left behind. I think it should become an American value. Right now, 30 million Americans are without health care. This needs to change. We're the wealthiest country in the world. There's no reason that it should be the case. Medicare should be a safety net for all Americans. Access to Medicare for anyone who has no coverage or is under coverage should be an option. Americans who lose their insurance because of job loss should be able to automatically enroll in Medicare. Quick access to health insurance for Americans who suddenly lose it for whatever reason. Medicare coverage should be comprehensive and also include dental, vision, hearing, and women's reproductive health. And as I've stated, this should be an American value. It should be a core value of our culture and our system, and we have to work for that standard.
Thank you. Candidate Viejas, what measures do you support to improve and secure voting rights in our country?
Sorry about that. Listen, what transpired on January 6th shows just how fragile this democracy is. I'm for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We need to expand and make sure that we make it easier for people, for Americans to participate in the electoral process. I took an oath as a Marine to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that oath doesn't have an expiration date. Now, my weapon may have changed. Now I have the power of the pen as a legislator. But I can tell you that I'm going to fight like hell to make sure that voting rights are protected here in this country. Republicans are attacking this process. You look throughout the states, you look throughout the country, Republican states are making it harder for people to participate in the electoral process. I want to make sure that we're making it easier. So Voting Rights Act is very important to me and is very important to this democracy.
Thank you. Candidate Shahade.
I agree. I think that we need to prioritize this. I think it's a trending issue amongst some segments of the Republican Party where they want to curtail people's rights and freedoms to be able to vote. And this sort of is reminiscent if you take a historical look at the Jim Crow days where there were certain obstacles that were put in place that were designed to prevent people from voting. And I'm afraid that we're in a situation right now, whether it be this particular issue or reproductive rights, where we're regressing as a nation. And what we need to do is we need to be strong and we need to be determined to make sure that we're not regressing as a country on this particular issue. I am on board with the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act 100%, and will do my best as a person who's in Congress to make sure that it comes into fruition.
And Candidate Ramirez.
I agree with the other two comments around supporting the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. It's the minimum we should be doing, and we should have already passed it. And the reality is that it is May 18th, and we still don't have the votes. We need to get people elected who are going to make this an absolute priority. I will become a sponsor, a co-sponsor immediately, but we also need to make sure that we're working for same-day registration, automatic voter registration, something that I worked really hard as a staff person with Common Cause to make possible here in Illinois. And I have to go back to campaign finance reform. When we talk about voting rights and democracy, the big money in politics, those corporations and those super PACs get involved every single day to get in the way of bills like the John Lewis Act from passing. We have to address them. That is part of democracy.
Thank you. Candidate Shahade, what steps will you take to reform current immigration policies?
Well, I am an advocate of giving a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. I think it's super important. We can't stay in the middle because, first of all, it is inhumane to have people in this country for such a long period of time not have access to the things that we have access to. I know people personally who are undocumented, who've been here for a long time, who are afraid to call the police. We need to give them a path to citizenship. Not only is it the humane thing to do, but it actually helps the country as well. Over $140 billion a year would be generated if we did that, because people are going to be going out there, they're going to be paying taxes. And so whether you're somebody who cares about the individual or the community or both, it is the right thing to do, and it is the just thing to do. And it's something that I've prioritized as one of the three main aspects of my candidacy, and I'll work towards that goal once I get elected.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez.
For me, it's not about who I know or maybe someone far away. I'm married to a DACA recipient. I have to worry about this every single day. This is someone that's been here since he was 14 and almost 22 years in this country and still waiting for that pathway. We have to pass comprehensive legislation. And for me, it's personal. It's him, but it's also my uncle who's 64 years of age and has put through 4 sons through college and still waiting for that day. I agree we need to put the 11 million people that are working every single day in this open economy because it's part of our continued growth. And right now, what we could be doing also is reducing the backlog in fees. So I support comprehensive reform, not just for DACA recipients, but for everyone. And I will work on it because my family depends on it.
Thank you. Candidate Villegas.
Thank you. This is a frustrating issue. We've been talking about immigration in the US for decades. And that's all it's been. It's just been talk. We need action in Washington, a comprehensive immigration reform. And we need it now. We need to bring the 11 million people out of the shadows, people that are paying taxes and contributing to our economy. There's no reason they are not fully integrated into our society. Pass the DREAM Act. They have only known the US. They need not to fear their future in the only country that they've known. Here in the City Council, we've expanded the Welcoming City Ordinance, the ordinance that was passed in the 1980s. We want to make sure that we're inviting people. Listen, the US is a country built, immigrants. We're all immigrants here. We've got to do something here. 11 million people, lives are at stake.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez, what is your position on abortion? Should this be regulated federally or state by state?
Jan, I'm going to try my best to keep it under a minute. But as you could imagine, it's a very, very personal issue for me. Abortion to me is healthcare. I'm the only candidate in this race whose rights are literally being threatened. My rights as a woman and someone in childbearing age. When I heard the leak, I immediately called a number of Latina electeds and said, what are we going to do? People in Spanish, women have to hear that in Illinois, we've protected them. We've codified Roe versus Wade in 2019 in preparation for this moment. But we also have to make sure that they understand that we will fight like hell to make sure that the federal level, we codify Roe versus Wade as soon as possible. I will work endlessly to do so because I understand that if I don't, my own rights and the rights of millions and millions of people and my nieces and perhaps a daughter to come will be threatened by this Supreme Court.
Thank you. Candidate Villegas, your position on abortion.
Yeah, on April 27th, I introduced a resolution to talk about women's reproductive rights. And if just 5 days later, we saw the leaked opinion from Justice Alito and the conservatives on the Supreme Court attacking people's rights across this country. It is an obscene attack of freedoms that have stood for nearly 50 years. I'm 100% pro-choice. The right to choose needs to be codified into law. And that will be a vote to ensure that we do codify it into law. I support revoking the Hyde Amendment. No person should have their income determine what kind of care is being provided. Reproductive rights is healthcare. In addition to these points, I will support Illinois' status as the only true safe haven in the Midwest for reproductive rights. I will support additional funding and protections for out-of-state patients to come and have access to for their reproductive care choices. We got to codify it in Congress as soon as possible. It starts with reproductive rights, but it's a slippery slope.
Thank you. Candidate Shahade.
Look, I think that the standard should always be that a woman has agency over her body. And that is the standard. And as a man and as a potential legislator, it is not something that I should have agency over or anyone else should have agency over. The reality is it is the woman who is in that position that ultimately will make that decision. And I think that that needs to be respected across the board, and that this is an issue that is something that is private, and the best person to make that decision is going to be the woman ultimately. And so that is the standard for me, and this is something that I will work for my family, my friends, and for the district as well. That is the standard and that is the premise.
Thank you. Candidate Viejas. How will you address the varied cultural, socioeconomic needs in the 3rd district that spans both suburban and urban communities?
Yeah, when I think about that, my ward that I represent here in the city of Chicago is really a microcosm of the district. I represent immigrants, middle class, first responders, and I can tell you that very diverse. 60% Latino, 30% Caucasian, 10% African-American and Asian. And every community has different needs. But the one need that they all have in common is making sure that they have a strong representative. And so whether it's a council member or I'm dealing with their issues on a daily basis, or as a congressperson that's going to Washington, D.C. to advocate for making sure that we're fighting for working families. The need is not unique across these different cultures. We're all wanting to make sure that we have great access to healthcare, public safety, and making sure that we can afford college, as well as making sure we're dealing with inflation.
Candidate Shahade.
Look, I've dropped out of high school as a kid. I know what it's like to struggle. Today I'm a college professor and a teacher, but the fact that I experienced that will go a long way as far as my understanding of what this community is all about. I've also been teaching for 20 years in an urban area with students from all socioeconomic backgrounds from around the country. I lived in both the suburbs as well as the city of Chicago. My father, towards the last 25 years of his life, lived out in Wayne, Illinois, which is on the western part of the district. We were born in Logan Square, so we have a clear understanding of what the district needs are. There is a fundamental difference, and this is a great question, of the needs of the suburban areas as well as the areas of the city of Chicago. And then when you combine that with the socioeconomic factor and different ethnic groups and so forth, this is something that I'm very familiar with.
And Candidate Ramirez.
Look, West Chicago, Logan Square, Bensonville, Addison, Wheaton, Glen Ellen, and the list goes on that represents this district. What I've heard from people, families, households, and townhomes, meeting greets and door knocking is they want the same thing. They want to be able to retire with dignity, and they want their kids to be able to have a better life than they had. This is why, for me, it's so important that we have a coalition builder representing us in Congress, someone that knows how to bring people together. I'm the one that's had experience in bipartisanship. I've passed an elected representative school board bill that we have not been able to pass in the state legislature for 10 years because I sat with people from all over the city. For me, we need someone that's willing to listen to people in Wheaton, listen to people in Glen Ellen, and listen to people in Humboldt Park and Belmont Cragen. It's who I am. I've been a coalition builder. and I will be the connector that this 3rd Congressional District can count on.
Thank you. Candidate Shahade, do you support canceling student debt? And if so, to what degree?
I do support canceling student debt because as a teacher for about 18 years, I see that students who are 20, 21 years old wind up $150,000 in debt. And look, I'm in this industry and I can tell you that there are certain components of it where it's an actual hustle, where not one class is taught to students on fiscal responsibility. So an 18-year-old kid takes out loans of tens of thousands of dollars a year. They're sold a dream. They're given an apartment in downtown Chicago. They're given all the trappings of something wonderful, yet they don't understand that they got to pay this money back. And so we are really hurting not only the student, but the country as a whole. These kids are not going to be able to buy a house. They're not going to be able to buy a car. Ultimately, that's going to hurt the economy. And what we need to do is we need a fresh start, and we need to start working on this debt to make sure that these kids in the country has a future.
Candidate Ramirez.
I support canceling student debt. I have a chief of staff who pays $1,500 a month in student debt, $1,500 in childcare, and $1,800 in mortgage. He literally lives paycheck to paycheck, and he's the 2nd highest paid chief of staff in the state of Illinois as a state rep in a state rep seat. This is the reality of our communities, and if we care about racial justice, if we care about equity and giving our young people, but also our social workers and our counselors an opportunity to be able to live a life with stability, we have to cancel student debt. The president has the power and authority with just one signature to liberate thousands and thousands of people and allow them to finally have financial stability.
Thank you. Candidate Viejas.
Yes, we need to find a way to lift the burden of student debt, which is mostly held by Black and brown women in this country. 45 million Americans are burdened with student debt. People are delaying all sorts of life events due to the crushing weight of student debt. I support canceling student debt for people on an income basis. If you make less than 60,000, we forgive it all. And as your income rises, we'll cancel less. I could not afford college right out of high school, so I joined the military, and I was able to come back from the Marines and take advantage of the Illinois Veterans Grant. And I remember that. And so here in the city of Chicago, if you have a 3.0, you can go to any city college for free. And so we need to take a look at making college easier to access, because we know that education is the great equalizer in this economy.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez, what are your thoughts on government regulation of social media?
That's a complicated one, right? We talk about freedom of speech, and then we talk about what we've seen, particularly what we saw January 6th. And when you have someone like Elon Musk having the ability to purchase Twitter, we realize that we are not living in a country where we're feeling safe. And certainly we see the influence of outside forces and also misinformation. We saw it in the pandemic and the number of people that have died as a result of what was being said about the vaccine and social media. I think that it is our responsibility. And as a member of Congress, I will hold social media accountable to ensure that they are not using that platform based on money or ads that they're getting from these companies or these individuals with money, that they influence and use that to cause wars, to cause fights, or to literally kill people.
Thank you. Candidate Viejas, your thoughts on government regulation of social media?
Yeah, this is a tough question for me as well. As a Marine who fought for this country, freedom of speech is important. But what you're seeing is big tech really not being regulated and allowing misinformation to go rapid. Whether it's the pandemic, whether what's occurring in Ukraine and Russia, you're seeing throughout the world that social media not being regulated is dangerous. And so when you saw people putting videos out there around the pandemic, allowing Americans, encouraging Americans not to take the vaccine without any type of fact check, I think it's dangerous. And so as a congressman, what I want to do is bring in these big tech firms and figure a way to make sure that we're allowing people to have the opportunity to express themselves, but do it in a responsible manner.
Candidate Chahade.
Ultimately, freedom of speech is the cornerstone of the American way, and it's a core American value, and we cannot erode it, because once we start doing that, we're going down a slippery slope. And so I support freedom of speech 100%. However, when there are situations where the actions that folks and organizations take on social media creates a danger for the country, or it creates misinformation for the country, that is about the greater good. And that's when you curtail people's rights to do such things. And so I'm 100% on board with freedom of speech, but at the same time, we have to make sure that that folks are not using that as a way to hurt others.
Candidate Viejas, what specific regulations will you propose to help curb global warming and other environmental issues?
Thank you for that. We need to push the environmental provisions that were outlined in the Build Back Better plan. It's a shame that the Build Back Better plan didn't pass, but that doesn't mean that it's dead. It just means that we need to take the great pieces that are out of there that can be put in the bill and begin to advocate for it and get it passed. Adding EV funding. I pushed for the electrification of the CTA fleet, and we can allocate funds to make sure that we are lowering our carbon emissions in cities across the country. We've got to be very innovative on this. Global warming is real. As much as people don't believe that, it is real, and we've got to make sure that we're acting quickly. I have two boys, a 19-year-old and a 14-year-old, and I want to make sure that I'm leaving them as a legislator a better place to live. Cap and trade, carbon taxes. At the City Council, I've introduced legislation to make sure that we electrify our fleet by 2035. Time is of the essence. We need to act quickly.
Thank you. Candidate Chahade.
Well, I support the Green New Deal. I think that it's very important that we take steps, drastic steps to try to curtail what's happening with the planet. Ultimately, this is the only home that we have, and we have to make sure that we protect it with legislation. And there are a lot of things that we can do to not only protect the planet, but ensure that businesses stay vibrant and that they stay in a way where they continue to thrive. And we can create programs and initiate programs that could do that both on the state, but especially on the federal level, by providing people and businesses incentives to actually go green. And it's something that, again, is potentially is about what types of values we want in the United States. Can this be a cultural value that we adhere to? And I think that we can do that.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez.
And we know this, climate change is a major threat to our communities. We see it in the floodings, we see it in the heat waves. We see it every single day. I too support the Green New Deal. And for me, it means reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's improving resilience and stability of our communities. And how we do that is we have to move to renewable energy, just like we did here in Illinois through the Clean Energy Jobs Act bill. Here in Illinois, by 2045, we will have clean energy. We did that, and I was a proud co-sponsor. We have to ensure that we hold our members of Congress and Senate accountable. Where are they taking their money? We're taking money from fossil fuel companies. And when they're more buddied up with them than actually working on the environment, then that shows us why we have not done what we have to do when it comes to our environment. We have to rebuild our communities by also expanding public transit. We know that transportation is the second largest source of greenhouse emissions. And we also know that buildings are the third source, which is why it's also important to expand affordable and efficient housing. These are things I've done here, and I want to make sure that we do in Congress.
Thank you. Candidate Chahade. What specific steps will you take to address inequities facing women in the United States, including the enactment of the Equal Rights Amendment?
Well, I think that the fact that we're in 2022 at this point and women still make less than men is deeply problematic. I think that what we need to do is we need to initiate programs and opportunities for women to get into fields, for example, that are underrepresented. I was out in Wheaton College a few months back, and there was a student group over there that actually educated me on the fact that not enough women are in the sciences. And so that is an example of how we can institute programs and initiatives to encourage women, to support women to be able to get into these positions. I'm also someone who's a proponent of childcare. I think childcare, especially for single mothers, is something that is deeply missing here in the United States. And we need to provide that to women so that they can go to work and at the same time be able to prosper and allow their children to prosper as well.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez.
Like, we have to enact the ERA. When we think about where women are in 2022, I have to go back to where Latinas are. We make 55 cents to the dollar of what our male counterparts make, 55 cents. And it's 2022. I'm looking to just make sure that it's still 2022. We have to make sure that we increase wages and then we go, yes, we raise the minimum wage, but we also need to look at where we are as a nation, because even $15 right now is not enough in many places. We have to get paid leave. The fact that women have to think twice, women like me have to think twice before they're going to start planning a family because they're worried about paid leave, not having universal childcare, and being a home care worker where you can't afford to have health care, or a child care worker that makes minimum wage. The list goes on. I want to make sure we have paid leave, universal child care, we increase wages for home care workers, child care workers, and we finally pass the ERA.
Thank you. Candidate Viejas.
Thank you for that question. I was raised by strong Latina women, and I can tell you that the ERA has been endorsed by enough states to make it to the Constitution, but Congress has to act. And I'll tell you, I'll fight for that. Equal pay for equal work. Sounds so simple. Equal pay for equal work. Paid family and medical leave. Paid sick leave. And finally, affordable child care for all families. Listen, when I remember my mom, and we were beneficiaries of survival death benefits, and the fact that my mom received that stipend allowed her the ability to work with dignity. And I'll never forget that. She used those funds for childcare. Listen, here in Chicago, I introduced a transparency wage act that will make sure that as women and men are applying for jobs, that we're all on equal footing. The fact that women make less than men is just wrong. In 2022, the fact that women are making less than 80 cents, depending for white women, 75 cents, 65 cents for Asians, and 55 cents for Latina is just criminal. Let's pass the ERA as soon as possible.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez, what steps should be taken to curb violence in our community?
I think we need to invest in our communities. I believe in taking a holistic approach, and that means investing in mental health services. That means investing in anti-violence initiatives that are proven and evidence-based. It's why here in Illinois, we just passed a budget of $200 million to go into our communities with co-responder models, mental health services, after-school youth initiatives, and violence interruption programs. We need to also provide resources to better train our officers. And it's why in Illinois, I also just passed legislation to be able to provide that training that our officers need. I have a track record in voting on legislation that gets to the root causes of violence. Violence is a public health crisis, and we need a holistic approach to address it.
Thank you. Candidate Viejas.
Could you repeat that question one more time? I'm sorry.
Sure. What steps should be taken to curb violence in our communities?
Yeah, I can tell you that we need to take a look at gun violence. Gun violence, Chicago and the state of Illinois have some of the toughest gun laws in the country. But when you have neighboring states that are not do not have as restrictive laws around gun violence, that's a big issue. And so at the federal level, we need to ban assault weapons. That's the biggest driver of the violence that's occurring in this city. But we also need to make sure that we're investing and violence prevention programs. In the last budget, we passed $135 million to violence prevention. We also need to reimagine how we police interact with our community. Listen, I'm not going to defund police. What we're going to do is make sure that we're training police, we're investing in police, we're investing in communities. The fact that there are communities that have been disinvested for decades is the core reason why a lot of this violence is occurring here in the city of Chicago and really throughout the country in urban areas. We've got to be smarter about how we do policing.
Thank you. Candidate Shahade. There's
a strong correlation between poverty and crime. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And when people don't have hope, they sometimes will resort to things. And so what we need to do is we need to root out poverty. That is the key right there. And so a lot of that comes from a universalist type of approach. We have to strengthen our education system to give people a shot and an opportunity. We have to restore properties and neighborhoods for people that own these properties to allow them the opportunity to be able to collect rent or to actually become wealthier. One of the core components of wealth in this country isn't actually inherited. Folks don't have inheritances. They don't have opportunities to actually become wealthy. And so we need to go into these neighborhoods and provide grants like SPIF grants, for example, to allow them the opportunity to prosper. Investing in small businesses, increasing access to social services. There's a strong correlation between psychology as well as giving people hope and opportunity and so forth. And so we need to tackle mental health. We have to invest in public transportation, invest in local industry. And take a universalist approach to all this. Justice reform is an important component as well.
Thank you. Candidate Viejas, what kind of policies will you pursue to promote social and racial justice in our communities?
Listen, I support the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. The fact is we need smarter policing, not less policing. And that means more funding for community programs that we know will improve our community police relationships, that will reduce crime. We need more investments in officer training and officer safety, including de-escalation and domestic violence programs, domestic violence training. We need to increase community-oriented policing grants. We need to expand investments to make sure that we're getting to the root cause of crime, including poverty, mental health, and addiction treatment. As your representative in Congress, I will be a voice for real criminal justice reform, while also supporting smart, targeted investments in police and public safety in order to reduce violent crime rates, drug trafficking, and illegal guns in our communities to make sure that we're staying safe.
Candidate Shahade.
Look, one of the problems with this is that there's a systemic and an institutionalized discrimination when it comes to this issue. And so what we need to do is we need to abolish systems like the private prisons. We need to show people that we're not the country of the 1950s and in the 1960s. We need to eliminate cash bail so that folks who are wealthier don't have advantages for essentially committing the same crimes. We need to set an example. We need to revitalize our community, specifically targeting those communities with an influx of grants and of wealth, and not investment from the outside, but actually investing in the people who actually live in these communities, investing in small businesses and encouraging small businesses and encouraging ownership of property and so forth. I mean, again, this is a universalist approach that needs to be tackled in such manner.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez.
We have to have an anti-racist approach the way that we see the world. And we have to understand that if we really care deeply about social and racial justice, then we're going to work for representation. I would be the first Latina in the entire Midwest going to Congress. Entire Midwest. I've never seen someone that looks like me. Not in Ohio, not in Illinois, nowhere. I also came from a school that really struggled. When I think about social and racial justice, there are basic things that we could be doing, like increasing the minimum wage, like investing in our communities that have been disenfranchised. We have schools that in this pandemic, we saw clearly how difficult it was to keep our kids safe and the teachers. We need access to healthcare. We need to cancel student debt. We need to make sure that we're creating spaces so that more people, more young people can see themselves in space of leadership and power. That's how we get to racial justice. And that's what I'm fighting for every day.
Thank you. Let's move to closing statements now. So candidate Shahade.
Well, look, I think that when you're beholden to the machine gets in the way of what you were elected to do in the first place, which is ultimately to be a public servant to help the people that elected you. My campaign has attempted to weed out the middleman, which in this case is the Chicago political machine. I have to say this, but the other two candidates were coordinated to run in these positions. My campaign doesn't have the fancy political endorsements of the politicians, but one thing we do have is that we are extremely authentic, and we have a willingness to go directly to the voter. At this point, we've knocked on and called thousands of voters at this point, and we are a proud and resilient campaign, and we urge you to join us. No PACs here, folks. No throwing our integrity under the bus for the sake of dark money from political PACs that oppress other human beings, who, by the way, are my people, people that I'm descended from. And if you talk about racial justice, Gil and Delia, remember the Palestinians, because what you're doing by accepting this money is you're throwing a very oppressed community under the bus.
Thank you.
We're just there. Real working campaign
Candidate
trying to make history.
Shahade.
Thank you very
Your
much.
time is up. Thank you. Candidate Ramirez, your closing statement.
I'm running for Congress because this race is personal. We have a lot of work to do to make sure that our government addresses the needs of everyday Americans. And I want to go to Washington to build on the work I've done here in Illinois. And I'm not running alone. I have a community with me. 300 volunteers recruited me to run for state rep 4 years ago. That same community is with me from West Chicago to Logan Square today. They want to see someone that is people-centered, and who someone has been before they ran for office is very telling who they will be when you promote them to higher office. I'm not beholden to corporate interests. I'm not taking corporate PAC contributions. My public job is my only job. That is why I need to be a representative in Congress. My parents have fought to bring me to this country, pregnant of me, my mother crossed the border so that I could be here. And I'll be an unapologetic fighter with a proven track record that is rooted in this community. And I hope to earn your support.
Thank you. And candidate Villegas, your closing statement.
Thank you. As a young boy growing up in public housing, I would have never thought I'd be here right now, running to be a congressional representative in the 3rd district, the first Latino veteran in the Midwest. I can tell you that when you're taking a look at the difference here, what we see is that this district is going to elect the Democrat. It's a very heavy Democratic district. I've knocked on tens of thousands of doors. Our volunteers have called tens of thousands of people. And I'm sorry for those folks that are out there that were calling in and sending you all types of mail and on TV. But I can tell you that we're going to send a Democrat to Washington, D.C. in this district. The question is, based on the conversations that I have with people in the kitchen tables, they want someone that's going to fight for them for public safety. They want to fight for someone that's going to do affordable care. They want to fight someone. They have someone that's going to fight to deal with the issue of inflation. And I'm your person. Please go to gilforcongress.com if you want to get engaged. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates. Your participation is now complete. Please stop your video and mute your audio.
Thank you.
Our time is up for this evening's forum. Thank you for attending. We appreciate your participation, whether you are a candidate or a voter. For 100% nonpartisan election information, please go to illinoisvoterguide.org, powered by the League of Women Voters of Illinois, and visit the local league's websites posted on your screen, where you will also find a recording of this forum and information on future forums. Please remember to vote. It's essential for our freedom and our country. Good night.